All right, looks like we're slowly having folks trickle in. Because the size isn't too terribly large, I wonder if we might be able to go around and just, introduce yourself one by one. If you don't mind, I'll call on folks. Maybe just tell us your name and what community you're from, so that that will be somewhat helpful to me and probably very helpful to you all who know each other's communities very well. So if you don't mind, I'll go around and sort of call on you one by one, just to go ahead and introduce yourself. And I'm going to start with Stephen Bean.
Yes, Stephen Bean, Concord, Vermont.
Thank you. Next, Sarah Statler.
Sarah Stadler, Woodstock, Vermont.
Sarah, I'll tell you, my uncle lives in Woodstock, Vermont, so we might actually know a person in common. Susan Brissy.
Hi, I'm from Jericho.
Okay. Jane Douglas.
I'm from Newfane, Vermont.
Great. Bob Robbins.
I'm also from Jericho.
Okay, great. Sabina Ernst.
I'm also joining from Jericho.
Great. This was the Jericho room, apparently. Sarah Lang.
I live in Brattleboro, but I work for the Economic Development Organization that services the Windham region.
Got it. Great. Thanks. Rachel Scudder.
Hello.
And for folks who are just joining in, if you could tell us where you're from, just so folks in the room know where you all are coming to us from.
So I'm a new planner at the Mount Ascutney Regional Planning Commission. That used to be the South Windsor Planning Commission, I believe. So I've only been here a couple of weeks, so I'm not sure of all of the zoning codes and everything in our jurisdiction, but I am here to learn.
Fair enough. So these towns in Vermont maybe may mean as much to you as they do to me, which is some of them ring a bell and some of them are very new to me. All right, I have S.J. Dubé. We kind of butchered that.
It's Doobie. No, it's Doobie, and there's a long story behind it. It's not my family name, so I won't share. I'm from Jericho, Vermont, and I'm a new member, maybe a little under a year, on our Affordable Housing Committee.
Got it. Great. Judy Kurtz. Oh, Judy, you're muted. That's okay.
There. I know better than that.
I know, we all do.
I'll start over again. I'm Judy Kurtz from Concord, Vermont. I've been on our planning and zoning board for 3 or 4 or 5 years. We're a small town, and so as I look at this material, a lot of it seems I'm not sure it applies so much to us, but I want to learn and see if maybe I'm wrong.
Fair enough. We'll try to help you with that today. Keith Thompson.
Hi, Keith Thompson from Whitingham, Vermont.
Okay. Next, Kitty Edwards.
She's muted.
Yeah. Or has stepped away. Kitty, are you there? Maybe not. We'll jump to Kevin Anderson.
Hi, I'm a new planning commissioner in the town of Waitsfield.
Got it. Okay, great. Let's see, who do I have? I have Chuck Wise.
Chuck Wise, town of Rockingham. We are updating our zoning bylaws right now, so all this information is very appropriate and timely for me.
I bet. I see Kitty's here. Kitty, could you tell us where you're from?
I'm from Westfield, and we are also updating our zoning bylaws, and I'm on the planning commission.
Got it. Sally Miller, can you tell us where you're from?
Sure, I'm from Woodstock, and we actually have a town and a village, and we are in the process of rewriting our village zoning regulations. And I will say that we went through a big discussion, actually made some zoning changes for short-term rentals in the last couple of years, and it took a lot of our time. To let you know.
I sympathize. And let's see, Kelly, I've saved you for last. I think, unless I've missed anybody, but Kelly, why don't you tell us where you're from?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Satterpour with AARP Vermont, and I've been working with CNU and the Department of Housing and Conservation and Community Development for these trainings. And I lead our livable community work here in Vermont, focused on ways that we can support livability so that older adults can successfully age in place. And zoning is a big part of that as we look at the affordability and availability of housing, and also ways that we can enhance mobility as we all age. So I want to really appreciate Mallory's time, and I'm excited to hear from so many of you that are working on zoning reform in your community. So.
We have, let's see, a few new people have joined. Let's see, Mark Serrano, could you tell us where you're coming from?
Yes.
Hello, I am a AmeriCorps member here at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission in St. Albans.
Got it. All right, thank you. I have Adam Dobson. Can you tell us where you're coming from?
Hi, I'm the Planning Commission of Peach. I'm a new member just as of about a month ago, so getting up to speed.
Great, thank you. I have someone just named Pat. So Pat, could you tell us where you're coming from, your name and where you're coming from?
Hi, Pat Sagley, and I chair the Planning Commission in Westfield, a town of about 500.
Got it. John Bennett. John, I think you're muted.
Right, you're right. How about the I'm with the Wyndham Regional Commission and primarily focus on helping towns with plans and zoning. So
thank you. And just for everyone's sake, it's a free pass when you're muted. Just we'll let you know. It's going to happen to me too before this is over. So let's see, Dean Pierce, can you tell us where you're coming from?
Work in the Planning and Zoning Office in the town of Shelburne.
Great. Seth Jensen.
I am with the Lamoille County Planning Commission, which is the regional planning commission serving Lamoille County. And I am also a member of the Westford Planning Commission, which is my hometown.
Got it. Caroline, can you tell us where you're coming from?
Caroline Massa. I'm the state hazard mitigation planner, and I'm a relatively new resident of Vermont, so I'm listening and learning.
Great. Did I miss anyone? If I've missed anyone, please speak up. I was trying to catch everybody as the little squares moved around, but I may have missed someone.
Stephen Bean. My buddy Stephen Bean. I don't know if you got him.
Oh, I got Stephen first thing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He was my first victim. All right. I think that's everyone. So with that, it does sound like we have a bit of variety here in, different stages of addressing reform in communities, different challenges for sure, and probably some different, let's say, different levels of engagement with the local zoning bylaws. So I wanted to kick this off by beginning with whether there were questions that you had following Tuesday's session, the Q&A, or related to the document itself or the pre-recorded videos that you might have watched, that you hopefully watched already. If any of you had questions related to sort of those things more broadly that you wanted to bring to the group, and if there's anything that I can answer, I'd be happy to try, but also to start to get the dialogue kicked off about, you know, like I said in the intro, what's working and what's not working. So I wanted to open the floor to anyone who might have some of those more broad questions about the process, the methodology, and the application in Vermont in general.
I have a question about form-based codes were discussed yesterday or 2 days ago, and whether that applies in small towns say under 3,000 or less, or whether it needs to be a larger town or city for that to be applicable.
That's a great question. I'm trying to make sure that I take good notes for this. The short answer would be yes, a form-based code can be applicable in probably pretty much any condition, insofar as it's written to address what that condition's needs are. And so, it's form-based codes are less about, you know, particular contexts and less about even particular population densities or particular development intensities, much more about just creating very predicted outcomes. And so that's, there are a lot of different ways that a form-based code can be really relevant to a very, very small village or even a hamlet, but one that wants to have very predicted outcomes, built outcomes, as much as that might be the case for a city. You know, the city of Miami has a form-based code. So, you know, it can cross the entire spectrum of development and of intensity. It's much more about how prescriptive, and I'll also say that form-based codes are on, when they are written, you can write them with more leniency or less leniency. And so that predictable outcome is a sliding scale issue where the value for people that invest in going all the way through a form-based code process, it usually is because, for a variety of reasons, they want to have a set of predictable, a predictable process and predictable physical outcome from their regulations. Now, that, as I started to explain yesterday, that, and Susan, or Tuesday, we're going to do that a lot as well, I think. Susan and I talked a bit about how incremental code reform and form-based codes are neither in conflict, nor are they the you know, sisters. They can work together and they don't have to. A form-based code or incremental code reforms are small scale fixes, but they might be fixes that are leading you towards a more wholesale form-based code outcome. They also don't have to be leading towards that. So think about incremental code reform and what the recommendations in the document are as something that's trying to address the most problematic conditions within an existing set of regulations. And sort of like, maybe you might call it triage, to use a medical, you know, analogy, where you're trying to address the things that you know are consistently going wrong with your existing regs.
Thank you.
You bet. I'm actually gonna call on Seth because there was a chat here, but Seth, I'd love you to extrapolate though on the experience that you shared through the chat, because I think that's relevant as well.
Okay, happy to. I'm still figuring out how to do their hand raise, so I use
Yeah.
chat instead.
Feel free to, yes, and I should
Um,
say to everyone, feel free to speak up. We're a small enough group that if there's something that you want to add in, feel free to do. If chatting and, you know, trying to get folks' attention that way is more comfortable for you, feel free to do that as well. But with that, I'll let you go back to it, Seth.
So I wanted to just share an example of form-based code in a rural community. So my hometown, Westford, has a population of about 2,000. The Planning Commission started looking into form-based code, I think around 2008, because someone tried to open a muffin shop in a vacant highway garage right on the common. And the traditional zoning was basically a disaster. So reuse of a vacant building for something everybody wanted couldn't happen. Started looking into options and found form-based code, adopted what we refer to as form-based code light, because it's, not what you'd see in an urban community, but it takes many of the principles. That was adopted in 2015, and last year, a new general store opened right in the center of our town. Would not have been possible under traditional zoning. We don't have public sewer or public water, but because of the changing to parking requirements, they were able to use a grandfathered system, build on the site, make use of all the land to fit in. And so, our older market, the one that had been open for, a century, closed in 2014. So a lot of us thought we'd never have a market again. But very clearly the form-based code, the simplifying the review process, made it possible for this local family to buy the lot, figure out off-site parking, and make a building that looks like it was there, 100 years ago, even though it's new. I've, with that experience, taking it to my professional world in communities in Lamoille County with as few as 800 residents, borrowed some concepts of form-based code, and seen similar types of things of small but meaningful development in their villages. So definitely smaller towns can use some of the concepts. I think key thing is, don't just cut and paste, don't replace your old cut and paste zoning with new cut and paste zoning. Really take the time to think about what you want, what works, and then run with it. And a lot of towns have a local family who would open a store if they had the resources didn't get eaten up by a long review process. So it's definitely possible in rural Vermont.
I think that's a great point, Seth, and one that, there are good form-based codes and bad form-based codes. There are good conventional zoning bylaws. There are not so great conventional zoning bylaws. The issue of the copy and pasting, I've personally, in other parts of the country, I've certainly seen that happen. Whoops, sorry, that was very loud. But I've certainly seen that happen where somebody has traveled somewhere that they really like the development that they saw, a community, and so they form-based codes are, because they're often visual, it's very beautiful, it's very compelling, and have brought that back to a community that the built outcomes are not, the markets aren't the same. The development community doesn't have the same set of background. The intensity there isn't the capacity for that intensity. There isn't the capacity to administer that level of oversight that the form-based code in another place may have had. And I think that it's the same lesson, regardless of the style of code, that you don't want to pick up something from one place that doesn't respond to what your local needs or circumstances are. Pat has a great question here, and I'm going to have to dive into the next breakout room in just a minute. That's what my little warning was. And one of my fellow facilitators may pop in here shortly. But the comment about communities having a housing viability program similar to Vermont's farm viability program that helps a property owner work through the financing as well as the permitting. And my short answer to that is that I do know of housing administrations and of different funding mechanisms that do tend to work with upfit or upkeep or improvement to existing homes. But from what I don't know, I'm not familiar with Vermont's farm viability program, and I don't know if folks in the room might have more clarity with that to be able to draw ties to different, essentially what we're talking about here is large homes that might be suitable for adaptation into multifamily, and funding mechanisms within the state of Vermont that might help to do that, or if not mechanisms, then agencies or organizations that might serve that purpose. I might elevate that to the room if anybody has any thoughts on that or any background in that, because that's sort of getting into some specifics on Vermont that I don't actually know for sure myself. It may be the case that y'all don't know. We may have opened up a portal into something that is very much needed, because I do think, oh, Pat said she was looking for models from elsewhere in the chat. I think that what the models that I've seen elsewhere would be where a state-based nonprofit or agency actually has an incentivization program in place to be able to do that. So I think off the top of my head, the ones that I know of happen to occur in much larger major metro areas. And so I don't know that that would really be translatable to Vermont, but I'm wondering if there is, because of Vermont's rural condition, if that relates to rural housing in any particular way, meaning that I used to live in South Carolina. There were certain financing mechanisms for community buildings, community facilities through the state, because it was a much more rural state, and most municipalities, in the most smaller municipalities didn't have funding mechanisms or, budgets to provide community facility, that there were different mechanisms for that really focused around the fact that the state is very rural and agricultural, aside from a few big cities. And so I'm wondering if Vermont has anything like that that might be something that could tie to housing, although it may not currently be a housing tool. It may not be currently used for housing. And maybe not, again. Well, with that, I'm sorry, Pat, that I can't give you a better answer of not having like a good example for you. But with that, I am going to pop back into the main room. But before I go, we talked about this in the intro, that these sort of broader categories of things like complete streets, things like development review process, dimensional standards, specifics around dimensional standards, are broader categories that folks responding to the survey had said they wanted to talk about. And I'm wondering, one thing that might be helpful, because you all are coming from quite different contexts, different size of communities, different parts of the state, I'm wondering if anyone that has particular challenges with their review process and are seeking, you know, solutions to that, or are working on particular solutions to that. I would think especially the folks that are going through some reform right now, maybe, you know, maybe looking at this specifically. And so I'd maybe elevate that question to the group of if anyone wanted to bring any discussion around particular aspects of their review that they'd like to see changed, or that they are working on changing, or that they have changed with success. And with that, I'm going to pop out. But like I said, one of my facilitators will be coming right back in to join shortly. So, so I'd encourage you to you know, go ahead and chat, and we'll be able to slide right in and join the dialogue and process.
Hi, Susan.
How are you all?
We're quiet.
You're quiet? You have nothing to say?
I do. I would like to ask Seth if he could explain a little bit the practical matter of going toward a form-based process. Evidently, the problem showed its face in his town back about, what was it? What did he say? 2008, but it wasn't until 2015 that they went to some form-based code. So I was wondering if he could give me an example of how they addressed the problem and how they moved towards this new way.
Sure, I'm happy to give an explanation. And actually, I checked my notes, and the muffin shop was actually 2003, not 2008. 2008 was when we started looking into wastewater issues. So even longer time frame than I had said. The Planning Commission started, the problem manifested itself really first with the parking regulations. So the Planning Commission had an interim step where they modified some of the setbacks and lot sizes, and then made changes to the parking regulations. And that was, that happened in about 2010, I think. Really started working on the form-based code in earnest, I'd say in 2012. And we were able to do that in part because the town received a municipal planning grant from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and had someone assisting us with pulling it together. At that time, it was really the first example of a rural Vermont community doing form-based code. So I think it took longer in part because we had to figure out how it would work in a rural setting. But it is, you know, if you want to do it right, you do really want to spend time talking about, you know, in the community and with people who live in the area, talking about what you actually want to see. And to do that does take some time. So we did have quite a few public meetings. We had people, you know, there's a big vacant bus garage in kind of the main street. And so we had people draw what they'd like to see. We did a game where, you know, we sized out the village and figured out what Monopoly pieces would, so it's scaled to Monopoly pieces so people could like move buildings around and get an idea of, you know, what kind of scales would be okay for folks. And so all of that took time. The actual writing of the code, once we got a sense of what we wanted to do, actually didn't take all that long. It was all that public input and public outreach. You know, we did have at the last minute some people on the development review board freak out because they confused form-based code with design review and concerns about, regulating type things like how many window panes you have, which some form-based codes do, but you'll, in the code, you can kind of see the responsiveness to that, where the window stuff is a lot simpler than in some urban form-based codes, because people were really concerned about being told what kinds of windows to use. And I think that was a reaction. We had some builders on the board who had experience with, restoring historic windows, and really great, really cool to do on historic buildings. But that was a compromise that was made with, the building community. And our new store actually uses some modern windows in some pretty cool ways. So I'm actually glad we made that compromise, because it's kind of a neat outcome. I don't know, I rambled a lot. Did I actually answer your question?
Well, if you could say, give me an example of how it reads now, say for your parking. What's different?
Okay, so under the old regulations, you had a table that said you need X number of spaces, and they have to be on your lot, and they also have to meet your front yard setback. That was the old regulations. And so for this bus garage, it was a, one person, really almost a home business, the one person cooking muffins and selling them out of the window. But she needed something like 6 parking spaces. And because of the 30-foot setback, that put them almost over the bank that went down to the river. So it wasn't possible. So, the first modification was pulling up parking, letting it up closer to the road. But some people were concerned that would turn it into possibly be a strip mall, which we didn't want there. So the big change that we made was allowing people to overlap parking. So if you have a home and business, you don't need, the peak hour parking can overlap. The really significant change was we had, makeshift parking along one of the town highways on the green that could count toward in that every parking every lot around the common basically got free 4 space reduction in parking, because that was there. And the builder could actually upgrade the common road parking. And we showed on not a master plan, but a very basic plan, where that new parking could be, got buy-in from the people who lived on Common Road, so that when the store came in, because of the grandfathered septic, there was no room for parking on site. They upgraded one of those public parking makeshift spaces to real parking. They're allowed to use it, but the church is also allowed to use it. The town can use it for overflow events. So it's not quite what you hear in form-based code in cities, where they say just don't have parking requirements, just use your on-street parking, because we didn't have it. But for this store, which is a bigger business, they got that 4 space reduction and then built, I think, 5 new ones on the common. The Historical Society bought a lot that used to have a blacksmith shop. They're actually rebuilding the blacksmith shop based on historic photos. And because of that 4 space reduction, and it's a small building, they won't need any parking. But I want to make sure we did have this plan for how to deal with parking. It wasn't just a kind of free for all. A community could, if you, so that's how an example of how to do that in that kind of setting.
I
Yep.
texted everyone the link to your zoning in case anyone else wants to look at it in detail after the session. It's super helpful. So I'm Hazel Boris with Placemakers, as you might know. And we just got switched off between facilitators, so thanks for letting me jump in. I see in your room you've talked about incremental code with reform using Seth's excellent example of the Westford home-based code adopted in 2015 and also looking requirements along with that. Are there other issues that you all want to dive more into, whether it's affordable housing, complete streets, development process, dimensional standards?
Hazel, this is Kelly. I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I think there's a few other folks. You were coming in and out a bit. So I actually missed sort of the last end of what you said.
Are other people having trouble hearing me as well?
Yes.
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 Weird. Let me switch. Thank you for letting me know.
Oh, you sound great right now.
It's better.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for letting me know that.
Absolutely.
So I thank you also for letting us switch facilitators. I know that can be a little jarring. I appreciate it. So I see from the notes that Mallory took that you all have dived kind of deep into incremental code reform, especially with the Westford example that Seth kindly shared. And I added a link to that document in the chat. Are there other issues of those other top 5 that you want to dive into next, whether it's affordable housing, complete streets, development review process, dimensional standards, or housing types?
I think affordable housing is one that we're very interested in, at least I am.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about your challenge locally?
Well, I'm from Woodstock and I'm on the Planning Commission. Sally Miller is our chair, and I believe she's in this breakout group. But housing generally is very expensive in Woodstock, and it precludes many people from being able to get rental or affordable housing in our town, even though they work in town. And so we really want to provide more affordable housing so that people don't have to drive into town to work because they can't afford it to live here. But it's difficult because our housing is generally expensive and we have many large homes with people who may not need that much space and maybe don't want to pay those taxes, but it's difficult to work toward being able to provide or to divide housing with our code restrictions, et cetera. Sally can probably say a lot more about this than I can. But
well, I'll just jump in for a little bit. I mean, we are talking about it, and as we are rewriting our village zoning, we will be discussing ways to make it more possible and looking at infill housing and accessory dwelling units. We actually have a lot of your recommendations already in our zoning. So the challenge is taking it to that next step and really figuring out ways that we can encourage people to do it, as opposed to just writing the regulation and having those in place without people taking advantage of those rules. So, I mean, when we were talking earlier about sort of the housing viability program, I think that that's something that really is important as we're looking at trying to do infill in our villages and to be as, you know, to keep it within our village areas as opposed to building new housing outside of the current districts that are already zoned for that.
So Sally, what are the challenges of taking your existing large historic housing stock and dividing it into duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes if you already have that enabled in your current zoning?
It's getting people to do it and getting people aware that they can, I mean, I don't know, we can definitely do the accessories, but but, and we'll look at other ways to introduce it. But we also have people, it's property values, people looking at their neighbors and saying, well, I don't want you to subdivide. I don't want you to add more units. We have neighborhoods that are very protective of their properties.
So you're saying that NIMBYism is perhaps limiting people's ability to actually use your existing policies and regulations?
No, it's not just that. Again, I also said that it's getting people aware of what they can do and making it more accessible.
Can I piggyback on that from Jericho?
Definitely.
So I think that we have quite a number of incentives available, particularly in our village centers, but that really hasn't led to any project development over the last few years, because it's so much more profitable to build outside more expensive homes and developments in other areas of the town. So we feel frustrated by the fact that incentives really haven't got us what we wanted.
So Bob, can you talk about some of the incentives that you all have tried out that haven't really gotten you what you wanted?
Well, there is someone else on this call, Susan, who's on the Planning Commission, who can probably talk about it more since I haven't been in part of that. I'm working on affordable housing issues right now with a new committee this year. But we have density bonuses in our village centers that would allow for more density. And we have some planned unit development, PUD, regulations that make it easier to be more flexible in developing affordable housing. And that's all spelled out in the town plan and the regulations. But those are not the kind of projects that are coming forward. And Susan, I don't know if you want to add something.
The only other incentive I would add that we have is for affordable housing in the village centers. A developer doesn't have to comply with a minimum lot size, but instead they can just adhere to a lot coverage metric. But Bob's right there. So there's a few different incentives, and the primary feedback that we hear, which is more anecdotal than scientific, is the lack of infrastructure. We have some topography issues, and we also had the primary development land owned by a single landowner who wasn't really in a position to be the developer. But the land has since sold, but maybe about 2 to 3 years ago, and is now in the hands of a developer. And the town is trying to collaborate closely with that developer to encourage the kind of housing opportunities that we're looking for. I do think that when you think about incremental zoning and the question that Pat asked at the beginning about programs, to me, it seems like if you're always trying to take the next smallest step with density, that a financing program that combines some education of homeowners and some financing, and then maybe some permit acceleration from the town to help people develop accessory dwelling units as opposed to multifamily, might be an easier incremental step to take. And the money that it takes to develop an accessory unit is a lot less generally than the money it takes to go from single family to a triplex. So I have actually asked, like, the Vermont Housing Finance Administration, VHFA, if they would consider developing a sort of a program where we could combine educating our residents, like, hey, you could make your house more affordable, and maybe a $5,000 or $10,000 loan or grant would be enough to put somebody over the hump. But it's like you can lead a horse to water. So I think we're optimistic in Jericho that this new development opportunity will produce some more diverse housing stock, but we have used many different incentives and they haven't produced results. I would agree with that 100%.
I love what you're describing right now, Susan. I think that could be so viable. I'm always working on the finance side of these sort of city planning and rezoning initiatives, and that frequently is one of the biggest things that is standing in the way. Also, as part of that, you may want to review your setbacks and parking requirements, because so often we find, even in places that have ADU and now increasingly with COVID, ACU. So in addition to accessory dwelling units, we're now having accessory commercial units so that people can add a storefront onto their homes in areas where that's appropriate from a transportation perspective. But really ensuring that those setbacks and parking requirements aren't also some of the other things that keep people from utilizing your incentives. Okay, so I've just been told by my fellow facilitators that we are switching again. So please continue your conversation in the meantime, and thanks for letting me pop in.
So any other burning issues? Or have you guys covered it all?
One of the concerns that we have in Weathersfield, I don't know if I'm coming through or not here. Can anybody hear me?
Very well.
Apparently not. Oh, okay. At any rate, one of the problems in terms of affordable income or affordable housing is that the median income in Windsor County is like $61,000. And so to be able to build affordable housing, it can't be more than 80% of that. And for around $48,000, it's virtually impossible to build anything. And the problem that we also have, and I think 70% of the towns in Vermont, or people in Vermont, have the same problem. 70% of the people in Vermont get their potable water either from surface water or from private wells. And with a wellhead protection area now that's been passed by the state of 100-foot radius, when you try to take a property and divide it into quarter-acre lots to get affordable housing, all of your wellhead protection standards overlap each other. And in a town like ours, where you don't have any sewer, now you're running into conflict not only with the wellhead protection overlapping each other, but now you can't place a septic system anywhere on the lot. And so it's very difficult to face both of those, to be able to develop something at less than 80% of the median income when you can't double up and take a 1 acre lot and split it into 4 pieces. And that's just one of the frustrations we're trying to deal with.
No, that's a huge issue, and particularly when you're dealing with septic on top of it. I mean, it's very, very hard to get the naturally occurring affordability that comes with smaller lots when you have septic. I mean, it's just kind of they cancel each other out. Sorry.
No, I was going to just say, unfortunately, a largest percentage of the homes in Vermont are served by septic, not by public sewer systems. So that's a pretty common problem in this state.
Yeah.
And in our town on the main street, people are getting their water from springs. These are old houses. And I've talked about to bring investment into the community. We don't have the money within our community to renovate buildings. And to attract outside investment, we need good sewer, good water, and we don't have that. And so there's just so many problems beyond zoning that we have.
That's the exact same problem we have here.
Yeah, Seth?
I have been working on that in a lot of different communities. I tried to count them and I ran out of fingers. It's a huge issue. One thing to think about with the wellhead septic is that also on our form-based code, we did some things to encourage on 128, which is the main road, people to use some of the small lots that had been developed in the 80s and 70s and 80s as kind of farmstead clusters. And what's happening is that because of where we're located, the crowd who can't afford closer to the Burlington is starting to buy up land, and often buying a piece of land that maybe has a septic and well and an old mobile home or house that needs a lot of repairs, raising it, putting up a new house. We kind of flipped that and said, well, you can also do multifamily by right. So instead of subdividing the land and needing the overlapping well shields, it's in a single unit. And we've actually had 2 people do that, both on the Milton Westford Road, which is going to create total 5 units. Not a lot in terms of, Vermont as a state, but, probably the doubling the number of multifamily units in the rural community. There are discussions at the state level about creating more loan forgiveness for rural villages, so designated village centers. There's also discussion about creating other ways to fund them. The problem is that a lot of people are competing for those funds, and the legislature really needs to hear from the small towns about the nexus of infrastructure as a housing issue. Because the way the rules are currently worked, they either look at, do you have straight pipes into the river, or do you have, or the median income of existing users? And well, if your village has, been vacated, there are no existing residential users to show the need. And there are some examples in other states, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but some of the great examples come from Texas, Alabama, and Missouri, of how to make rural infrastructure work without overburdening existing residential property taxpayers. So,
we did, I live in Albuquerque, and we did a project in the southern part of the state that comprehensive plan a number of years ago, and for Doña Ana County, and they, something like 85% of their residents are on septic and well, and they have like 35 out of the 51 designated colonias in the country. And so, places that have abysmal infrastructure. And one thing we looked at was how do you, not actually a package system, but how can you do something that's more affordable and yet allows you to cluster in a way that creates community. And this is especially looking at their village centers, and that you could actually have some degree of mixed use. And so plazas are very common here in New Mexico, like greens in New England. And so utilizing that common public space as the septic and, a shared septic system, basically a package system. And there were some interesting cost savings that we were able to discover by developing with shared wells and shared systems, like Seth was mentioning. So, there's some creative thinking that's gone on. I know EPA has been very involved in some really creative thinking about how to handle rural wastewater systems. And so it's not like it hasn't been done, but it's very much a challenge to do it, to your point, Lynn.
I think it generally requires some kind of a condominium agreement or something like that, because you have shared liability of a common system, and that can turn into a can of worms when it comes time to repair, who gets assessed for what percentage, et cetera. I've seen them work. I lived in a town down in Connecticut for a while that had some very upscale housing with one communal leachate system. Each house had its individual septic tank, but they used a communal leachate system.
Yeah.
And it worked really well. It was just a concern that at some point, if that fails, what's your next step? Unless you have
to have some sort of a condo association that cares for the maintenance.
Right. And at least in Connecticut, the powers to be kind of frowned on those, because they figured if the septic failed, what are you going to do? You know, you can't declare the houses unlivable, and it's miles to a sewer treatment plant. So if it fails, you can't overnight extend sewer service to that area to serve them. And so they just were a little bit paranoid about going that route and approving those kind of systems.
Yeah, usually there's lots of bonding possibilities that wind up getting attached to it on the part of the developer. But yeah, the local government has to make sure that they're protecting health, safety, and welfare when they permit it.
Oh, look at you. Good for you.
Look at you. Well, you guys are remarkably quiet.
Maybe that's the Vermont way.
That's good. I'm originally from Alabama, so we're quite the chatty Cathys.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So,
one of the other situations, I mean, if no one else has anything to jump in on.
Pardon me, Lynn, there was someone else that was trying to speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Who was it?
As Caroline. So I'm someone who is looking for housing right now. It's a newcomer to Vermont. I'm staying with in-laws right now, and the house is small. So, you know, from my perspective, I feel like there's just a complete lack of housing, right, that I can afford in that new buyer range. And I'm wondering if some of the changes that are happening to zoning are, you know, is there a mismatch with demand? Are people wanting to be in Vermont to, you know, have enough land so that they can let their dog out and have a garden, and they're not necessarily looking for those multi-unit buildings, especially one that's splitting up a house and not really built for multiple people to be, you know, working and living there. So is there ways maybe that housing could be developed in a sustainable, walkable way that didn't mean people had to live right on top of each other?
Yeah, I think there's a scale of housing solutions between the, you know, the subdividing of the old mansion to the loft over the shop in the center to the small, you know, the cottage courts and the small places, the small housing that has a little more room. But, you know, in all honesty, with your land cost and development cost in the state of Vermont, even cottages in most states, your prices would be completely unattainable, you know, to most incomes. So, yeah, I think there has to be a full declension of housing offered, and usually there is. I mean, we've even seen in Burlington in the last few years, some cottage courts have been developed. You know, some small lot single family houses. I think that's one reason why Vermont's regulations on ADUs is really progressive, because in some senses with very large old lots, to have an ADU on site, you know, essentially the effective lot area of the two residences is still more than it would be if you bought into a cottage court. So I really think to, to say that there's a single solution for affordable housing is inappropriate. There's, we have to meet the people that are we have to begin to serve the people that are almost houseless. And we also have to be on that whole declension, get to the young families and young professionals that are buying for the first time. And whether it's rental or ownership, there really we should be trying at a policy level to to supply that demand at every market point. Yeah, if we're good business, if our municipalities are good business people. I don't know if that helped.
I'm just curious, sort of on that note. So I'm from out of state. I've been living in Iowa, and then I moved to Northern Kentucky. I'm from New York, and now I'm moving to Vermont. So I'm just curious. Some of the models that I've seen for affordable housing have been almost in a way where almost like how the Netherlands does it, where there's a housing that houses, a bunch of people, and then it's all the same sort of level of housing, but people pay different amounts. Is there any models for that in Vermont?
There are, I don't know about Vermont, that's a really great model, and we've seen it in a lot of places where we worked, where, it's a blended product within a single development, where you have market rate, you have 120% AMI, you have 80%, 60, and 40. And if you disperse it and make none of it dominant, then there's an issue of equity that comes along with that, and there's no stigma associated with poverty. And, it seems to help socially and economically and educationally for everyone.
Hi, this is Susan Brizzi. We do have a building that's like that specifically for seniors in Vermont called the Pines on Dorset Street in South Burlington, where the apartments are identical. The only thing that's different is the rent that is paid, and a certain number of the units are designated as affordable. And I believe that Heinsberg has inclusionary zoning in their housing regulations. So a development of 10 units or more is required, I think, to have a certain percentage designated as affordable. But their regulations require, I don't know it exactly, but my impression is that the regulations require that there's not a discernible difference between the units in a development that are designated affordable and those that are not, specifically so that they have that blended price point within the same development, and there's not a stigma because it is completely invisible as to which units are subsidized and which ones are not. And I think that's sort of newer zoning in Heinsberg that seems pretty progressive to me.
So we're going to have to head back to the main room. It looks like they're getting ready to close us down in 1 minute. So is there anyone in this room that would be willing to represent the conversation from the last hour and kind of do a download? Seth, would you do that? Okay. All righty. So if everyone will return to the main room, that would be great.